You can be desperate internally, but you can't be desperate externally. You have to stay focused. You can feel that desperation, right? Like, I just need a job. I'll do anything. You can feel that internally, and you can talk about with your friends. But what you need to do is create a focused plan and a strategy and stay at it. And when you go on an interview, you need to be able to clearly articulate where you can add value and what you're looking to do, and not express that desperation or that feeling of defeat.
Welcome to Work Unscripted. I'm your host, Marlo Lyons. I'm here to toss aside the corporate scripts for unfiltered truths. We are tackling real work challenges with no sugarcoating, providing you with the strategies to thrive and find fulfillment in your career. It's time to turn the page. It's time to be unscripted. If you're feeling exhausted, burnt out, and desperate in your job search, you're not alone. But our guest today has strategies to help you move from desperation and defeat to focus, fortitude, and finally, a fulfilling job you want and deserve, even in a challenging market. Today, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the job search with none other than Jane Turkewitz. Jane, a former executive recruiter in media, entertainment, and technology, and now a coach for early career professionals, is here to debunk the myths and lay out the secrets to getting your resume noticed and making a lasting impression during interviews. If you're tired of sending applications into the void and ready to take control of your career, this episode is a must listen. Jane, I am so excited to see you, and I'm so excited to talk to you. With your background in executive recruiting to early career internship placement at UT Austin to early professional career coach, you have seen everything. I know you have.
Yeah, I have. Hi, Marlo. It's so nice to see you. Thanks for having me on your show. And yes, it's true. I've kind of been through the entire spectrum of hiring at this point.
Yes, you have. And you're direct, because I see it on social, and that's how we met. I reached out to you because every single thing you wrote on social, I just wanted to scream from the rooftops, truth. Jane knows everything. Jane is so smart. Jane knows how this works. Everybody needs to be following Jane.
Well, I don't know if I know everything, thank you, but I think that when you spend years recruiting, you learn a lot from the inside out that you can share with people. And my goal is to not sort of espouse my knowledge, but really help people. That's kind of how I approach it.
And I know that you're going to be candid. So here we go. You ready? All right, first of all, I just want to talk to you about the market. We both know 2024 was a disaster. It really was. I mean, we hope 2025 picks up. Here we are, new year. But job seekers are still exhausted, right? They're exhausted, they're burnt out. In some cases, they're truly desperate. So, job searching is not easy. And it's, I think it's been a rough year for everybody, right? It's not just early career professionals, it's executives too, right?
Yeah, all over the board. I think that technology has made applying for jobs so much easier, but yet has made it so much more difficult to actually get anywhere due to the number of people who are applying to so many of the same roles. So it becomes much more difficult for people to stand out and break through the clutter.
And people think like, I am perfect for this job, right? Like, I have the exact skills that they're looking for. Everything they say in their job description, I've got. And then they apply on LinkedIn and they hear nothing. So why? Why?
So there are so many reasons. First of all, a lot of the jobs on LinkedIn might be live and still live, but sometimes they're actually not live anymore. So what will happen is the recruiter or the talent acquisition person at the company will select their social media engines that they want to put their jobs on. And then if they don't turn those off when the jobs are filled, then those keep reposting. So,
so jobs that are posted, that's why people say there's a lot of fake jobs. Are they fake jobs, or are they just jobs that are closed?
They're just jobs. Well, it can be a couple of things. First, they could be closed and then nobody shut that off. And so LinkedIn just continues to repurpose those. Or it could be that sometimes, especially if it's a junior level role that there could be like multiple iterations of it across the company. So let me give us an example, like a media planner role at a large agency. The company could be just constantly hiring media planners. So they just want to have sort of a pipeline of candidates coming in, and they might not necessarily have particular open roles for that individual right now. Also, I just think it's really important to know that when you're sitting as a recruiter within an organization, right, which I've done myself, as a consultant, when I look inside an ATS and look at the number of applications that come in, Marlo, I will tell you 90% of those applications are totally irrelevant to the role.
Really? 90%?
Easily. I would have people applying for a marketing manager or VP role at a technology company, for example. And I was getting resumes from people who were in retail or were servers at restaurants. It's crazy how inaccurate the matchup was. So there's this spraying and praying mentality out there amongst candidates. So you would think that the select candidates that are the 10%, maybe it's 20% who actually make sense would get those interviews. But not necessarily the case if all they're doing is applying into the ATS. They have to get themselves out of that ATS. When I say ATS for your listeners, I'm talking about the applicant tracking system.
Tell me about that. So, and that's the thing, people hate the black hole. I call it the black hole of death, right? You apply online, whether you're applying through LinkedIn or you're applying through an actual company website, you are applying into what's called an applicant tracking system, right? And that's a system basically that holds all the applications. And so how do you get through that? Like, you can't just apply and hope that somebody's going to reach out to you.
Yeah. So I always tell people, my clients that I'm working with, that you have to figure out who to network with, because and it's not the recruiter. The recruiters are responsible for looking through every single resume. That's their job. If you reach out to them directly, they're most likely not going to give you any extra attention just because you reached out to them directly. They're going to say, apply into the system and we'll look at your resume.
Wait, back up a second. They don't look through every single resume. Come on.
They're supposed to.
They're supposed to, but they don't. I mean, I've interviewed so many recruiters. They said they look at the first 20. If they find what they're looking for, they stop. They look through the next 20. If they find what they're looking for, they stop. Then they keep going. But they don't like say, okay, there's 500 applicants. I'm going to screen all 500.
Oh, so this is where you're making such a good point. So one of the things that you need to do is you have to apply quickly.
Oh.
So you're right. So if you want your resume and your application to be seen, and you see that posting has been up for a month, you're probably too late.
You're
probably too late.
They're already in interviews at that point on most jobs, right?
Yeah. So what you need to do is really... My recommendation to job seekers is this: spend 1 to 2 hours a day on your search, whether it's a job, whether it's an internship, and apply to 1 to 2 a day, and then try to network your way into the department as well with an email. This way, if you search every day, you start to see the same postings over and over again, and you can go through them real quickly, and just get to the new ones and then apply directly to those real early. Honestly, with companies as big that are huge, like Sony, for example, you have to apply within the first 3 days in order to get noticed. They will get 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 applications for one job.
Well, and I'm going to get to networking in just a second, but I just want to ask you, with all the AI, right? So people are using AI both for their resumes, but also recruiters are using AI, like HiredScore, to surface those resumes that have the right keywords so they don't have to look through the 500 resumes, right?
I mean, to a certain extent, yes. It really just depends on the technology that they're using. AI certainly is helpful to help the recruiters go through applications quicker. And that's why it's so important that when you apply as a candidate, that you really update your resume. So, I'm not saying you have to put in hidden keywords. I'd rather you put in actual keywords within the resume document itself that are not hidden, because that's what the recruiter or the hiring manager is going to respond to, not the hidden white text words.
What do you mean by that?
The system. So there's this whole gaming the system that people put these words in that are keywords in white text so that the system will see it, but the person reading the resume won't see it. That happens, but I don't really understand the value proposition behind that. Why not, instead of doing something like that, customize your resume each time you apply to include those keywords that are very necessary? Obviously, being truthful about the skills that you deliver with those keywords.
Okay, I have never heard about this hidden keyword thing. This is new to me, that people actually do that. But then when they open the resume, if it doesn't already have the keywords in the normal text where people can see it, they're not going to be considered, right?
If they don't have the information in there that makes sense, they're not. So what that does was sort of gets them through the first gateway, but doesn't get them through the second one. So what's the point of that, right? Like, listen, I don't want to age myself terribly, but when I first entered the marketplace, we printed out our resumes on linen paper.
Yes, we did.
Customizing them was not that easy, right? Now it's so easy. So when I work with my clients, for example, if they've got a key skills area or a core skills area on their resume, what I do is I have them update that as they apply and reorder, not only update it, but reorder. So the things that are most important come first, right? Because studies say that you have 6 seconds to make an impression on somebody with your resume, which is quite insane. So thankfully, with computers, you can change your resume and make it stand out for each role that you apply for, and you need to do that.
So that's 6 seconds. You're talking about recruiters read resumes in 6 seconds. So I want you to tell me the truth. Have you ever read a resume from top to bottom, every single word, before calling somebody to interview them?
Nobody does that. But what they do is they eyeball what the jobs are. So where are they working now? What are they doing now? What do they do beforehand? I would look at the dates, and I can make a pretty big judgment call quickly whether I felt like that person was right for the job, which is why sometimes you need to be a little bit creative in how you lay your resume out so that, if you're filling in the holes right now, or the gaps, and let's say you're at a restaurant, you're a server, or you're working in retail, that's great. And that's admirable. You do what you need to do to make money, but you've got other experience. Let's say you're looking for a role in film or editorial. You've got other experience in your past that shows that you can do that. You need to just switch the order of your resume around and have film experience first and then other. So you have to do these little tricks so that the person reading your resume gets it right away that you're actually in the industry and have the skills that they're looking for.
Right. I always tell people that it's not a backward-looking resume. It's not everything you've ever done. It's a forward-looking resume showing me the capabilities that you have to do the job that you're applying for. Right?
Exactly. It's basically a marketing brochure that's selling you. And I try to drive that point home, right? Instead of showing somebody or the reader or what I would call the buyer everything and anything that you can do, you want to highlight the things that you can do for them. That's relevant for them.
The value you can bring to them.
Exactly.
So we talked a little bit about networking. We were just getting into that. So I have a resume. I've applied for the job. I'm perfect for the job. I've reached out to the recruiter. I hear nothing, right? Which is, you told me 90% of the time, they don't have time to respond to you. They're juggling multiple requisitions or job openings. They're, maybe they'll look at your resume if you flag to them, but maybe not. So when you say networking, when I hear that word, I cringe. I hate the word networking. It just makes me go, it means I want something from somebody, and I hate asking people for things. So what do you recommend for networking in this situation in order to get your resume seen if you don't know anybody?
Yeah. So there's a lot of elements to that question. So first of all, I would like to make one comment regarding reaching out to recruiters. It doesn't make sense to reach out to a recruiter who posts the job for a very large company. But if it's a small company, it could make sense to at least try the recruiter. Okay. I want to just say that because they're not going to get as many applications. And if you're truly qualified for it and it's an organization, maybe it's a nonprofit or something like that, and you might have a better chance reaching out to that recruiter. So I just want to say that. And then in terms of networking, there's a couple of things there's a couple ways that you can go about networking. One way to network is by reaching out to alum. If you went to a certain college or university, do a search and try to find people using filters on LinkedIn who went to your university. Now, people are always saying to me, well, do I reach out to the senior person? Do I reach out to the junior person? So I think that what you're going to try to do is find somebody in the department, ideally, that you're interested in working. That's number one. And if you can't, maybe find somebody ancillary to that department that would do a lot of work with them. For example, sales and marketing work very closely together. Product and technology work very closely together. So if you find somebody in those ancillary departments, I think that could be a good connect. But if you really have the choice picking between someone junior or senior, I would suggest picking the senior person, because the VP is all about trying to help people at this point in their career. And I'm not saying that younger people aren't willing to do that. They certainly are. But I do think that the older we get, the more we want to give back and help others. So that's one way to reach out and network.
They also have higher influence, those VPs, right? They have higher influence.
Oh, thank you. That's actually true too. And that's a really big thing. So if you're meeting with a VP and they're giving you a courtesy interview or a conversation because you applied for a particular position at that company, when they flag your resume, it has absolute weight. When a junior person does it, honestly, it doesn't necessarily have as much weight. I will say, though, larger companies do pay their employees referral fees.
Right. Under director, right? They'll pay referral fees if you make a referral.
Correct. So, and you can get as much as $500. So that's pretty good, or even more. So something else to keep in mind. I think one of the mistakes, at least young professionals and early career folks makes, is when they try to reach out to people, they simply ask them if they could refer them. Nobody is going to refer you without understanding whether you have the skill set or the character for the role. Their reputation is on the line. So when you reach out to somebody, you do need to reach out to them, asking them to have a conversation with you. So if you can't find an alum, you want to find the hiring manager or somebody in the department that you're working with to reach out to. My recruiting friends are not going to like what I'm going to say right now, but I have heard this many times. Sometimes hiring managers are not that happy with all the resumes they're getting from the recruiting team. And that might not be the recruiting team's fault. It could be that they're just taking inbound resumes and forwarding and not doing any outbound recruiting because they don't have the bandwidth and they're overworked. But it offers an opportunity to the candidate. If they reach out to the department individually and on their own, there could be a connection there that's exciting for the hiring manager.
That's a big deal, actually, that reach out. And you said reach out and have a conversation. What does that conversation look like? Are you doing the talking? Like, am I the candidate doing the talking, or am I asking questions and letting them do the talking?
Yeah. So, when I teach students at the University of Texas, what I tell them is when you reach out to somebody to network with them, you automatically have to tell them what you applied for, what you were interested in. Don't reach out to them before you applied for something. Unless, of course, there's no role listed open in the department you're interested in, but you have to make it really clear right up front. This is why I'm reaching out to you. This is what I'm interested in. And I would love to be able to have an informational call with you to talk about your experiences. And hopefully that person will be open to doing that. You're going to get a lot of rejections, by the way, and a lot of no responses. But if you do get people on the phone or do get a person on the phone, it is absolutely 100% your job to lead that conversation. You asked for the meeting, you need to come there prepared to talk. This is really hard for people,
yes,
especially young professionals. But you need to be prepared to talk with questions to ask about the person, about the company, about the opportunity, about the divisions you're interested in. If you are nervous and you are coming up empty, just know people like to talk about themselves.
Yes, they do.
You can always talk to them about their career, their trajectory, how they got where they are. And your goal is to develop a rapport with this person so that at the end of the conversation, they're going to offer to share your resume or flag your resume. That's the goal.
And this is a long-term relationship. I think people forget it's not a one and done. I reached out to you. I applied for that job. Oh, great. You're going to refer me. Now I don't get the job. Okay, I'm done with you. And I think people forget that. They forget that you have now just made a connection. You've built a relationship. How do you maintain that relationship?
So I think this is where we get down to the meat and potatoes of networking. You mentioned that the word networking makes you cringe. And I think that is what it does to most people, because most people think of networking as reaching out to somebody and asking for something for themselves. No, that's not what networking is. Networking is building long-term relationships. So there's mutual beneficial opportunities with one another over the years. So you have to stay in touch with people. How do you do that? First, you link in with them and you follow them. So if they get a promotion, you send them a note congratulating them. If the company gets a big win, right? Like they win a new account or whatever. If it's a services organization, you reach out and say, oh, I just read about your new big win. Congratulations. That's incredible. Don't just reach out to them to talk about you. Reach out to them to talk about them. On the holidays, it's real simple to just send them a happy holidays. Hope everything's well. Here's what I'm up to. I look forward to hearing what you're up to. Just be thoughtful, and you have to give as much as you take.
This brings me to that fear mongering that I see out there on backdoor jobs. People always say, oh, there's this whole backdoor job market. You have to be a part of it. If you're not a part of it, you're not going to get a job. And I hate the fear mongering, because backdoor job markets to me means there's a job that's posted, but they already know who they want to hire, right? Or they're going to promote someone from within, but they have to post it because their company requires that. Or exactly what you've been talking about. They haven't posted something yet, but they just got budget for it, and you're in touch with someone, and now they're about to post something, and you've built that relationship with someone, and they're thinking of you for the job, or you may learn about it before it's even posted. Is there something else to this backdoor job market that I'm missing?
I don't think so. I mean, the only other thing that you're missing is nepotism, which is real.
True. It exists, right?
So, especially I would say in the finance industry, that is just the hardest thing, especially for young professionals to break into. And it's really nepotistic. It remains that way. So, Joey's uncle, John's got a niece who just graduated from blah, 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 and that person's going to get the job. So, or sports marketing, right? Like, oh God, those are so competitive, or music. So there is the nepotism thing, and you have to fight that. Luckily, there's usually multiple opportunities and there are some openings, but I will tell you that's why it's so important to reach out individually and not just apply into an ATS, because you're at a disadvantage for people who are already making those connections. Go to conferences, meet people, shake people's hands. That is the most powerful thing. Right. You can do. Make an impression on somebody.
I was just talking to somebody yesterday who said they weren't going to a conference that was in town, but they are going to go to the bar and hang out there all night, because they don't need to pay for the conference. They just need to sit at the bar and have a drink and talk to people. And I was like, that's brilliant if you can't afford to go to the conference, right? You will still meet people from the conference. And so
it's true. And one of the things that you can think about doing is, if you know that there's going to be a conference in your industry that's going to be coming into town, and it's an annual conference, reach out to the administrators of the conference and volunteer. See if you can help with event planning or organization. That is very powerful. You can get in for free and you start making a name for yourself within.
Very smart. Very smart idea. Okay, so I'm lucky enough and I get an interview. Tell me about the most memorable interview you've ever done as a recruiter. Somebody who stood out, who made you go, oh my God, I want this person to get a job.
Oh gosh. I will tell you that there's too many of them. There really are. I would say that the people who stand out for me and who will stand out to anybody in the recruiting business are the people who do their homework. It's just that simple. If you come into a meeting with somebody and you are unprepared, it is the death of the interview. So what has always resonated with me is the person who comes in and understands who I am, where I've come from, and has done research on the client that I'm working with. So I think I'd like to back up for 1 second and say that I'm talking about myself as an external recruiter.
Right.
So I'm not talking about being an internal recruiter, right? Because while I've done that as well as a consultant, I expect that person for sure to know what my company is that I'm consulting with, right? But as an external recruiter, I give the candidates all the information before they sit down and talk to me. I don't play games and say, oh, I've got this company that does, blah, 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 and being all secretive like recruiters can be. And by the way, recruiters are secretive about it because they're afraid that the candidate will go directly to the company or go to another recruiter working on the same piece of business. So that's why they keep everything so close to the vest. I don't operate my business like that. I was always transparent with my candidates. So they knew exactly what they were interviewing for, exactly what the company was, exactly the role. And I expected them to do the research with me. And I will tell you the biggest mistake that I would hear also, Marlo, is this. Well, I'm saying this to you because I'm not on an interview. Like, well, yes, you are on an interview.
I'm not on an interview. Yeah, you're talking to me. You're on an interview. This is an interview.
I got that more often than not.
They don't believe the recruiter's an interview. Recruiter's the gatekeeper, right? Like they are the gatekeeper. They're either going to put you through or they're not. Like that is your first interview.
The reality is the recruiters are paid by the companies who hire them. They are my clients. The candidate, I'm trying to find the proper candidate for them. As the candidate, it's your job to sell me that they should be presented by me, because if I present a candidate that's not going to be appropriate for that role, that makes me look bad, that affects my reputation, and it affects my business. So absolutely, the biggest mistake I see is when a candidate says to me, blah, 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 blah. Usually it's complaining, like how they hated this job and they hated this manager and they hated this and they hated that and they don't want this and they don't want that. But of course, I'm only saying this to you because I'm not in an interview.
Bye-bye to that candidate, right? Instantly.
Typically what I say to them, you are on an interview.
Wow.
I just want you to know you are on an interview. I'm evaluating this conversation. I will coach them to move forward because that's the kind of person that I am. You mentioned in the beginning of our conversation that I'm transparent. I'm a coach. I'm a guide. So that's what I would say to those candidates. But yes, you're right. I wouldn't send them.
Is that the thing that turns off interviewers in the first 30 seconds? Like, is that the thing? Like, if they're interviewing with a hiring manager, what is the thing you hear the most that just turns them off instantly from a candidate? Is it negativity? Is it complaining?
Negativity is definitely not good. I recently saw one of these, influencer type recruiters on LinkedIn write something about, it's okay to be negative. Let that fly. You should be honest. Da, 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 da. And, you got to take advice from people like this with a grain of salt. It's not okay to be negative. And it's not good for you, right? Let it out. Like everybody does have negative experiences. Let that out with your spouse, your loved one, your brother, your sister, your bestie, whatever. Get it out of your system and then figure out what you learned about that experience and be able to flip the conversation on that and bring your skills and what you learned, whether it's what you want to be doing or what you don't want to be doing. But you really don't want to be negative in a conversation. You just don't.
So are you saying that there is a very big difference between authenticity and honesty in this scenario? Because you want to bring authenticity to the conversation, but you don't have to be honest about every last little detail that happened in your last job, is what I'm thinking.
I think throughout the whole process, sometimes people just want to give more information than they need to. So focus on what needs to be given. Everybody doesn't need to have every single bit of information about your life or what your thoughts are. You want to focus on the job at hand, what they're looking for, the skills that you deliver, how you deliver upon them, success stories that you can tell to support what you're trying to say, versus things that can derail the conversation. Why focus on any negatives? It's just unnecessary. I don't think it's being dishonest. I think it's just being selective in what you want to share.
That makes sense to me. I mean, I even say that when people ask, what is your biggest development area? That doesn't have to be a negative. It doesn't have to be, oh, I don't listen, or, oh, I'm not good at reading the room, or, oh, it could be something positive, negative, or positive development, right? And show that you've made development.
Right. And I think those types of questions are so leading because, people have been coached so much about trying to say something positive and not negative. I would hope that hiring managers are straying away from questions like that at this point.
One would hope.
But one would hope.
So the one thing I noticed that most candidates don't realize is that their energy during the interview is just as important as what's coming out of their mouth. How do you gauge what kind of energy to have?
Yeah. Ooh, this is a really good question. And it can be really tough for people who are not type A personalities. So I want to give a story if you don't mind, because I find that can be illustrative. So we went with my students at UT Austin, we went to a talk show. I'm not going to mention the name of the show, but let's just say it's a talk show. And we were able to talk to one of the producers, came out and spoke to the students. And then the head of finance came out and spoke to the students to talk about what he does, et cetera. And he talked about interviewing. And I would say he was in his mid-50s, maybe. So he's had a lot of experience. And I'm saying this for a reason, because he was speaking to a bunch of students who had internships in New York City. And he says, in the advice he gave to the students, for those of you who are introverted and don't feel comfortable speaking a lot, you've got to fix it. You can't go on an interview and be like that. You just can't. People don't have time for it. You need to work on that and fix it. And I was very taken aback by his words. And I don't agree with him at all. But what frightens me for people who are more introverted is that people out there do feel that way. So I think that if you're introverted and you have a hard time making eye contact and you have a hard time really putting a lot of words to your answers, you should go for mock interview help. You should practice in front of a video, and you need to at least learn some of the skills that you need to exhibit on an interview in order to be successful, because there are people like this person who will make those judgments, unfortunately. I think eye contact is really important. Like for me personally, when I have somebody in the room with me who's interviewing with me who keeps checking their phone, that interview's over for me.
People do that?
That is just a dumb deal.
People do that. I'm shocked. People do that.
People will hear their phone buzz and they'll go like this and then put it down.
Wow. Yes. Turn your phone off before an interview. Always a good idea.
Turn your phone off. I'm okay if you want to keep it on because you want to take some notes, because a lot of people take notes on their phones when they're interviewing. And that's okay as long as you tell the interviewer. Right? You don't want them to think you're like texting, your bestie while you're in the middle of an interview.
I do find that story.
But you can't be distracted by it.
Yeah, I do find that story disturbing, especially for neurodivergent communities, right? When you're talking about autism or you're talking about ADHD, you're talking about things where, eye contact is really difficult, focus is difficult. I find that just very lack of inclusivity. I guess there's a lack of inclusivity with that, the way he thinks. But unfortunately, you're right. It exists out there. And the judgment that somebody has on your interview is within seconds. Well,
this is such a good point to tap into, Marlo, because you and I know this because we're in the space.
Right.
But guess what? Hiring managers, who are the people who are actually hiring for their departments, they're just not trained on this stuff.
No. They're
not trained on how to interview. They are not trained on diversity initiatives. They are not diversity interviewing.
No, they're not.
When I say diversity, I'm talking about all over the place in terms of neurodivergent, anything else. They're not trained for this. And it's a real big problem. And it's not going to get fixed anytime soon. So people need to know that going in, and they need to practice. So, and eye contact can be very difficult.
Yeah. And that practice, you have to practice. And even if you don't fit one of those, categories of neurodivergence, or even if you aren't introverted, you have to practice. Like, I can't tell you how many people I know who are extroverted, who are great speakers, who need to practice, because then they overspeak as well. Because if I ask you the question, or if somebody interviews you and asks you the question, tell me about yourself, they don't want a 6-minute answer. Right? They want a 30-second answer, or walk me through your resume. That's a 2-minute answer max. Most answers are under 2 minutes. And so you have to know what things to include, what things not to include. putting things in the STAR method, all of that good stuff. And so everybody needs to practice. This isn't just a certain class of people or a certain type of people that need to, practice.
It's a good point. And I did just seem to focus on those who are quieter and have a hard time really, articulating things with their experiences. It's like the three little bears. You can't have too little or too much. It has to be just right. And I agree. There are people who just stray away from the question and go on. And you have to be able to read the room, right? So you have to be able to look at the person and make sure they're still engaged in the conversation and listening to you. By the way, this is why those higher view screenings are so brutal.
They are
because you have, a set period of time, up to 3 minutes to answer a question. I tell my clients, don't ever speak that long.
Never.
You will absolutely never. You will lose. But it's so hard because you can't read the other person's reactions to what you're saying because it's being videotaped.
Yeah. So HireVue is a videotape system, right? That companies are now using to do those initial screens. And
Correct.
so that's becoming more and more common, isn't it?
It is becoming very, very common. Most of the larger companies are using these. And I think the biggest misconception is that candidates will call them an interview. And I might have even just called it an interview. It's not an interview. It's a screening. It's a screening.
What's the difference? Fill me in. The difference. Are you in the process for a job on that first conversation? Or is that just a screening? And what is the difference? Help people understand that.
Yeah, I think you are. Anytime you have a conversation with a recruiter, you are on an interview. Absolutely.
Right.
And even if it's a short conversation. So let me just tell you what the difference is, why I call it a screening, a HireVue, a screening. I call it a screening because a lot of times now applicant tracking systems will have these short answer questions, and those are meant to be screening questions. This is the same sort of thing. It's just done by video. There's no interaction between the two of you, and that's why it's not an interview. But when you get on the phone call with a recruiter, and especially an internal recruiter, a lot of the times, especially with a larger company, what the recruiter is trying to understand is who you are, what you're interested in, and where they can potentially place you within their organization. So when you get on the phone with a recruiter at a company, what you need to be able to clearly articulate are the different areas that you're interested in. And you should never shut anything out, by the way, right? So let's say it's a PR practice that specializes in healthcare, technology, blah, 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 blah. One should never say, I'm really interested in healthcare. I actually don't really have an interest in technology because honestly, maybe the only openings they have is in technology. And why would you close that door for yourself? This seems very obvious and intuitive, Marlo, but people make these mistakes all the time. So the minute you talk to a recruiter, and a recruiter interview is so different than a hiring manager interview, the recruiter is trying to figure out, who would you make sense for within my company? Where could I share your resume? And oftentimes that's what they'll do. They'll say, oh, Marlo's interested in marketing, product development, and sales. So I'm going to share her resume with all the 3 leaders and stakeholders within those departments and see who's interested. And then you'll start interviewing with those different stakeholders depending on who raises their hand.
But if it's marketing and sales, shouldn't those be 3 different resumes? Like, how do you have one resume for all of those different departments?
Well, I think that's why the resume doesn't get you the job. The interview gets the job. The resume is going to get you noticed and get you in the door for that conversation. So what the recruiter is going to do is say, here's Marlo's resume. She mentioned that sales is one of her top interests. She mentioned that marketing is one of her top interests.
But you still should focus your resume, though, for one particular area, even if the recruiter might be sending it somewhere else.
It doesn't have to be one area because you just don't want it to be all over the place.
Right. That's the whole thing, right? Like you only get one LinkedIn. So you kind of have to have one direction, more or less. But
directions can be, disciplines can overlap each other. So you just want to make sure that you focus on the disciplines that are cross-complementary, I guess is the best way to say it.
So when you're, talking about people interviewing, what do you think is the biggest mistake people make? Like, how do they blow it? And tell me about like a story that maybe made you go, really? Really? How could that have happened?
I think one of my favorite least favorite stories is when I sent a candidate to one of my clients. It was a technology company, and I sent this gentleman who I have known for years. I mean, I worked with him when I was on the marketing side in business. He was somebody I worked with, and really smart guy, hardworking. I knew him personally. I knew him professionally. And I sent him to my client, who was the CEO of a startup but fast-growing technology company. And when he came in and he met with her, he said the wrong company name in the interview.
No.
And she immediately shut him down.
And it was over.
Like, didn't finish the interview, basically showed him out of the office. Oh. And it was super shocking for me and embarrassing. But the reality is that he didn't take a deep breath and stop and properly prepare and completely focus on this interview. Because you apply to so many different roles that I could see it gets confusing, which is why I tell people to always keep a log sheet of everything that you've applied for and a status on that log sheet. Who have you spoken to? Did you hear? Because you will forget. And I don't know where his head was or what was going on with him personally, but he went in there and he bombed that interview because he said the wrong name. Did
he know it the second he said it?
Yeah. Well, she,
called him out,
said, bye.
That's the end of that. Do early career professionals make the same mistakes, or have you seen anything, from early career professionals that's just common that they need to stop doing?
Yeah, I'll give you a good example of the biggest mistake that I saw. I had a student who I was working with who was looking to get an internship. I got her set up with a PR firm that specialized, oddly enough, in the same categories that I just mentioned: technology, healthcare, finance, things like that. And she interviewed with the recruiter, and the recruiter said to her, "Oh, so, what do you plan on doing after you graduate? What are you looking for?" And the student said, "I plan on going to graduate school and getting a degree in fashion."
Why is she interviewing?
The interview was over.
Wow. So this goes back to that whole authenticity versus honesty thing.
That's exactly what I was just going to say. Yeah. So, and then, the young professionals or early career folks will look at me wide-eyed and say, "Well, what am I supposed to say?" And I say, "Well, what you're supposed to say is, I'm just starting my career out. I'm in New York, to secure an internship so I can learn about different industries. I know I'm really interested in PR and communications and marketing, but I'm really open to the fields. And that's why I'm here, to get that experience, to get a deeper understanding of what I might want to do when I graduate."
How frustrated are you as the person trying to help a young person or trying to help a professional, secure that job that they've been wanting for months and months and months, and to watch this happen? It must break your heart.
Oh, you mean when the candidate does something that I wish they didn't do?
Yes. Even as a person who's trying to help them, besides them being devastated, it must break your heart as well, because you're working your butt off to try to help them get to where they want to be for their goals.
You know what? I look at it this way, Marlo. It's not about me. And I'm doing the best I can. And every time something like that happens and I get thrown for a loop, it's such a learning lesson for me. So what did I start doing? I started teaching that, every semester I added that to my teaching. It's make sure, I'm not asking anyone to be dishonest or lie, but you don't have to show them every part of your book, right? Yeah. You just tell them you're here to learn, you're open, you're excited, and then switch the conversation so it's not about you, but about the company and, why you applied and what's exciting for you.
Do you think that comes with the generation, though, that we're in, where everything is shared on social media, everything is public? If I eat a ham sandwich, I'm taking a picture of it, right? Do you think that's where it comes from? That whole transparency thing is just out there? And therefore, I forget that I shouldn't be doing this on interviews?
No, I think what happens is that people completely forget that they're selling themselves. And that is how I have to drill the point home. you are selling yourselves. You need to tell them what they want to hear, as long as it's truthful about how you fit the needs that they are looking to fill. I tell a story. I'll say something like, if you go to a Best Buy and you meet with a salesperson and you ask for a 42-inch Sony, and the guy says, "Oh, I've got the greatest thing for you," and he takes you to see, a Sanyo that's 60 inches, you're going to be like, why are you showing me something that I'm not interested in? It's the same thing. You're the salesperson. Tell them something about you that they're going to be interested in, not about something that you think they might be interested in, like the television salesperson who tried to sell you something you weren't looking for.
Right. Tell them something that's relevant to the actual job that you're applying for.
It's really not that hard, but you got to drill that home to people. They don't get it. And the preparation is, take a look at that job description, look at the qualifications. What are they looking for? Make sure that when you prepare to tell your story and your capabilities, that you look at those qualifications and say how you meet that one, and how you meet that one. And sometimes a company will have must-haves and like-to-haves, nice-to-haves. Man, if you have any of those nice to haves, you got to really drill those home, because that's going to help you to stand out.
That's that unique quality that you bring that nobody else has. So for example, if you majored in finance, right, or you have a finance background, but now you work in a different area, talk about that, because you understand how money's made, right? You understand the flow of money. You understand the financial implications of decisions that you make. Like, it brings that unique perspective that you have that nobody else will have, right?
Right. And I would say also, that along with being able to tell your story in terms of what they need is super important on the interview. And also what's super important is to be able to get across the fact that you're somebody they'd want to work with. And that's the hard part. That's really hard. And that's where judgments come in, right? And it's so hard to control that, right? If you're sitting across the desk from me and you're just not feeling like you connect with me personally, that could kill the interview. So the other thing I would suggest is to just be curious, right? Be curious. I remember, if I might tell you a story about my own journey that I've spoken about in classrooms, et cetera. I was interviewing for a job at the New York Times. It was my first job out of school. And it was for a market research role. And I had no idea what market research was. I was a Russian history major, just to give you some context.
Complete opposite.
But I think that's important for your listeners to hear, right? Because you have no idea where somebody's coming from and what might work. And this gentleman told me I'd be conducting some desktop publishing and creating these reports, these research reports. We went through the interview, and at the end of the interview, towards the end of it, I said, could I see one of these reports? Because I really didn't know what he was talking about. I'd never done any of this. And he looked at me kind of funny, and he said, yeah, of course. And he gave me a report, and he said, feel free to take it home. Let me know if you have any questions. He called me the next day and offered me the job. He said he'd been looking to fill the job for 6 months, and I was the first person to come in and ask to see a copy of a report.
Just that curiosity. I always say curiosity is the thing that solves everything if you just ask a question.
I think a lot of people are afraid to ask questions because they're afraid to look dumb, or they're afraid to look like they're not knowledgeable about something, especially early career professionals. Right. And I think asking questions is key.
But, not asking questions, like, you're not expected to understand how that company works, right? You're not expected, because you don't work there. You don't work inside that company. So you have to be curious about, what is the culture? I know that's a very basic question, but what are the intangibles for the job? Because not everything's listed on that job description. How does that leader lead the team? How often do they have team meetings? Just simple, basic questions will give you an idea whether you're going to fit and whether or not you're really interested in that position. And they can feel that. That's where you build that connection with someone.
Yeah. I agree. And I always tell my clients, going into an interview and sitting with somebody for 20 minutes and then not having any questions is the death of the interview. How could you talk to somebody for 20 minutes and think you know everything about the position, that person, the leadership, the culture, the company? It's just not having questions shows a lack of It shows a lack of intelligence, honestly, and it also shows a lack of interest. It says to me, you're going in for an interview, but you're not really interested in this job. It's so easy to ask questions, right? Mm-hmm. And I would go even one step further to say that a great way to make yourself stand out is to ask questions that are more focused on how you can be successful. So I'm interviewing with you, Marlo, and I'm interviewing for a job, and I say to you, what are the top 3 things that you're looking for me to accomplish maybe in the first 3 months? If you hire me tomorrow, how can I help you the most? Mm-hmm. What was the definition of my success? Things like that. I think that those are much stronger questions than tell me about your culture and if you have happy hour on Friday afternoon.
Right. And what am I going to be graded on at the end of the year during performance reviews, right? How am I going to know what is going to make you think that I'm a rock star, right? That I'm at the top of your team. You're right. That makes total sense. All right, Jane, we're going to wrap up in just a few minutes, but what is the worst piece of career advice that you have seen out there on the internet or advice that has been given that you think people should absolutely run from?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. So I would say that one thing is that people say that if you don't have all of the skill sets for a job, you shouldn't bother applying. Statistics show that men are much more likely to apply for roles, even if they don't have the skill sets, 100% of the skill set, and women aren't, which I find to be so interesting. But the reality is that you should follow the 80-20 rule, right? If you have 80% of the skills required of that role, you should apply for it. Another one is this woman who I mentioned earlier who said that it's okay to be negative on an interview. Absolutely not. It is not okay to be negative on an interview. Somebody else wrote that the thank you letter should be dead. There should be no thank you letters. That is absolutely insane to me. You should write a thank you letter after every single interview that you have.
And back to the recruiter, right? So if I interview with the hiring manager, I also write back to the recruiter afterwards, right? And say, hey, I want to let you know I spoke with John. It went great.
Absolutely. But your thank you note is a way for you to continue to sell yourself. And it's a way for you to get in front of that hiring manager again. It's a way for you to answer a question that perhaps you couldn't properly answer on the spot, but you wanted to give more thought to. It's also the right thing to do, frankly.
So now
those are just a few of them.
I'm sure there's a ton. But on the flip side, what's the one piece of advice you want to shout from the rooftops and let everybody know that they need to know right now in 2025?
From a candidate point of view or from a hiring manager point of view? Because when I give advice, I give to both sides.
Why don't you give it to both sides? Why not?
I think for the hiring manager and on the hiring side, I would say the biggest thing that I think needs to be fixed and the biggest piece of advice I can give to people is to not lose your bedside manner, for lack of better words, right? These people are struggling and suffering. And when you put somebody through the process and they have one interview, even one, they deserve a note back telling them that they didn't get the job. Stop with the ghosting.
Right.
It's just inappropriate. And ghosting is really when you've had an interview. If you've had an interview with somebody, that person needs to be told what the status is. The most egregious things that I've seen over and over again are the people who have presented to board members, to C-suites, to panels, who have put in 7, 8, 9, 10 hours of work into coming up with fresh ideas, 3-year plans, 5-year plans, only to get a generic note back from the company saying, sorry, we're not moving forward with your candidacy.
I've seen it as well.
That is beyond the pale in terms of rudeness.
Beyond.
So I know you have a million applications in your system, but when somebody interviews, you need to treat them with kid gloves and kindly. It is affecting the reputation of your company. And so that's my biggest piece of advice on that side. And then on the candidate side, I would say my biggest piece of advice is to not get so frustrated and so upset with the situation that you start saying to somebody on an interview, I will do anything.
So
Just
don't
give me
be
a
desperate.
job. You can be desperate internally, but you can't be desperate externally.
What do you mean?
You have to stay focused. Meaning like you can feel that desperation,
Got it.
right? Like I just need a job. I'll do anything. You can feel that internally and you can talk about with your friends. But what you need to do is create a focused plan and a strategy and stay at it. And when you go on an interview, you need to be able to clearly articulate where you can add value and what you're looking to do and not express that desperation or that the feeling of defeat.
But what about all the people who are doing that online right now? I see that on LinkedIn all the time saying, hey, folks, I don't want to do this, but I'm now at the point of desperate. I'm about to lose my house. My kids aren't being fed. Is that okay? Or, or are you saying just don't do it on an interview?
I don't think that whenever I see those posts, Marlo, my heart hurts for those people, but I also always feel like they're doing themselves a disservice because they're never saying what they're looking for or where they can contribute. They're just expressing desperation. How can I help you if I don't know what you're looking to do or where you can lend value to somebody that I might know? So instead of expressing the desperation, express where you can lend that value. Give people the information they need to be able to help you. Also, by the way, I recently had an early careers client tell me that they stopped reading LinkedIn's newsfeed because it was making them really anxious. And I support that 100%. If somebody's posting a job on LinkedIn and it's, through their newsfeed, you're going to see like #job alert. You can read that post. Otherwise, just keep going.
Don't
pass all through it. Don't read it. Don't doom scroll through it. It's too hard.
It is.
Go through the jobs tab on LinkedIn. Don't read through the newsfeed.
Jane, you have given so much incredible advice. Any last final thoughts to those who are still looking for a job today?
Yeah. Basically, my thoughts are work on your job search for a couple hours a day and then let it go and go do something meaningful and therapeutic for yourself, right? I'm not a meditator, but I love to go hiking in the woods. So even if it's just do something that gets you off the computer and out of it for a little while. I think it's really important for us to all maintain our mental health. And there are plenty of things that you can do without having to spend money that can help you to regroup and feel centered because it's not all about the job.
And it's not all about staring at the screen all day.
Exactly.
Jane, this has been enlightening. I hope it has been helpful to some of our listeners. My gosh, we covered interviewing, we covered job searching, we covered resume, we covered AI. Jane, you are incredible. That's all I've got to say. If people are looking to find you, where do they go?
Yeah, so best place to find me really is find me on LinkedIn. All my contact information is there. My email's there. It's my first name, last name at Gmail is the easiest way to find me. You don't even have to think about that, but go to my LinkedIn profile. And
that's Jane Turkewitz. That's Turkewitz. And so they can find you on LinkedIn and, of course, follow you without a doubt. Even if they don't want to connect, please follow because Jane has the best advice. I've been reading it for years and I every single time want to scream, yes, that's right, Jane. Out there. Get it out there, Jane. So thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for appearing on the podcast.
Thank you, Marlo. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll be talking soon, most likely again. Work Unscripted is produced and edited in partnership with the team at Palm Tree Podco and 21 Digby. The content for this week's episode was created by me, Marlo Lyons.